Hi there. I'm Indira Samarasekara.
And I'm Martha Piper, and we are so glad you are joining us today for our podcast, She's Got Nerve.
This podcast is based upon our book Nerve, which we wrote several years ago to assist women who are leaders or who are aspiring to lead by interviewing extraordinary women and recording their unique and authentic personal stories about how they developed the nerve to become leaders in their respective environments. We hope to learn more about what it takes to lead as a woman in today's world.
You know, Indira, it's been such fun and truly an honor and privilege to interview so many remarkable women on our podcast, women who've gone first. And that is, they've been the first women to have led their respective institution or organizations. Really worth celebrating. But what we are recognizing, I think, through these interviews is that a historic appointment does not necessarily mean our work is finished. The real challenge remains in ensuring these appointments are not one-offs, that they become ordinary rather than extraordinary, that other women follow in their footsteps. I think Michelle Obama once said, "You may be the first, but be sure you're not the last." And I think there's some real truth to that. For those of us who've gone first, we have a responsibility to ensure that others will follow. So that's the focus of our podcast, to assist women to not only be appointed, but also to ensure they are supported and succeed. And I think because of this, we've identified the issue of nerve being a critical component of being a leader in these turbulent times. And what we have observed is women sometimes, not always, but sometimes lack nerve. Nerve to be true to yourself, nerve to take a path less traveled, nerve to go first, nerve to act decisively, nerve to redefine yourself. And yet, so often, the term nerve is used pejoratively when applied to women, such as the nerve of her, or she's got a lot of nerve. I find that so interesting, don't you?
Yeah, I think that what we're trying to emphasize is that women are often criticized for being nervy. It should be just the reverse. It is an attribute that is required to lead rather than a characteristic that women are not entitled to exhibit. So let's get right to it. What a treat it is today to have a conversation with Nadine Caron, the first Canadian female general surgeon of First Nations descent, as well as the first female First Nations student to graduate from the University of British Columbia's medical school, being the top-ranked student. She also received an MA degree in public health from Harvard and completed a postgraduate fellowship at the University of California, San Francisco, focused on endocrine surgical oncology. Nadine currently works as a general and endocrine surgeon in Prince George and leads the Northern Biobank Project, which improves patients' access to personalized medical research in northern BC. In 2014, she co-founded the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health at UBC and has played numerous roles at the federal, provincial, and local levels to improve health outcomes for Indigenous peoples. She has received honorary degrees from the University of the Fraser Valley and SFU and is a recipient of the Order of British Columbia. We also heard today, Nadine, from you just that you are the first female professor in a surgical specialty. That is just unbelievable. So it is really a treat to have a conversation with Nadine Caron, a trailblazer, public health advocate, and academic leader.
Hi, Nadine. It's so nice to be able to spend some time with you again. So it's really wonderful to have you with us today, and we're so grateful to you for doing this. It's very special to be able to connect with you, to hear your stories and learn more about what inspired you to follow the career path you've developed. Indira and I are really fascinated about how women get to where they are, what inspired them, and what factors influenced their decisions to lead. Now, I read recently that your decision to become a surgeon was linked almost serendipitously, and we've talked a lot about serendipity in our book, but almost serendipitously to your athletic prowess as a basketball star at Simon Fraser University. The story, at least the way I read it, it suggests that at the time you were leading the women's basketball team to greater heights. And at that time, you had very little interest in figuring out what you wanted to do after basketball, after you graduated. But that all changed with this kind of serendipitous encounter at a barbecue in Tennessee where you were competing at a basketball tournament, when a hospital acting as the corporate sponsor invited any of the players who were interested to visit the hospital, I gather. And from what I understand, there was also a surgeon at this barbecue who invited you to shadow him over the summer. You jumped at the chance and are quoted as saying, quote, "The nurses just basically scrubbed my hands, I hope well, to get me into a sterile gown. And I stood at the operating table, and he asked me if I was ready. By the time we were finished, I was covered in blood, and I just was amazed at what I had witnessed. And then you said I was hooked."
Mhm.
But even more interestingly to me, this one event, you continue by relating that following the surgery, you ducked into a bathroom, grabbed a paper towel, and now is this true? And
This
wrote
is true.
down, quote unquote, "I found it. This is what I want to do." Now, honestly, what an amazing story, going from basketball tournament to observing surgery kind of cold.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously. And within a minute or right after that, committing yourself to this as a career. I just think this is so unusual that one event set you on a course that you have never before contemplated. And what a journey it's been. My goodness.
It sure has been.
So can you share with our listeners how critical this moment was and why you were so certain? I mean, I don't know how old you were then, but you were just about ready to graduate, so maybe 20, 21. How certain you knew that this was the right thing for you?
Well, it was actually, it is a funny story because people, when they ask me, why did I choose surgery and why was I so sure, they expect something very different. But it's literally, our team at Simon Fraser University was at national championships down in Jackson, Tennessee. And you're absolutely right. There was a corporate sponsor, Hospital Corporation of America. And after we lost, they were coming to say goodbye to us as we were heading back up to Canada. And I think we
Did
were
you
all had
win, by
lost.
the way? Did you win?
You know what? No, and that's one of those things, like if you're going to ask me what in my path, if there's anything I would change, I think I would change the outcome of that game. But you know what? But who knows? Because I think one of the things was they came in and we were on our way back to Canada, and the administrator asked if anyone was interested in a career in healthcare, medicine or nursing, that just to contact them. And I don't want to date myself, but it's going to come because there was no email, there was no cell phones. It literally was a phone call, landline to landline. When I came back and basketball was over at SFU, and I was, I had one more year to kind of complete my undergrad studies. And I was, starting to be asked more and more, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? And for the first time, it wasn't going to be get ready for next basketball season. And so essentially, I picked up the phone and said, you know what, I'll take you up on your offer. I'd like to come to Tennessee for the summer. And the next thing I knew, in the mail, about a week later, were, the old paper airline tickets. From the hospital, a ticket one way from Vancouver to Memphis, Tennessee.
Amazing.
And no return date. I hopped on the plane. I went down to Memphis, Tennessee. The people that we had met, the administrators who were so supportive, picked me up at the airport, drove me to Jackson, and then they had a welcoming barbecue. And they had, by that time, found a physician who would let me shadow them. It turned out that this physician was a surgeon. And all of a sudden, I'm at this welcoming barbecue. About an hour into it, his pager goes off. And 15 minutes later, we are just finishing a trip with country music playing, heading down a dirt road in a pickup truck with this stranger that I have just met, and I'm about to see my first surgery. And he literally, the whole hospital welcomed me. This was very obscure to have. It wasn't a teaching hospital. They had no experience with people kind of being there, and hence they were just like washing my hands for me. And I ended up in this operation, and it was eye-opening. It was inspiring. It was a crazy experience. I had never thought I would ever see something like that. And I don't know exactly when it happened, but I think it was the time when he cross-clamped the aorta, which is the biggest blood vessel in the body, to stop this man from bleeding out on the table, and calmed everyone down in the operating room and gave the anesthesiologist some time to transfuse the patient on the table, while he then started talking to me and explaining the anatomy so calmly, so collectively. It was a life-changing moment. Absolutely. By the time I finished and left that operating room, that was my new basketball. That was my new, the basketball court was now going to be the operating room. The team was going to be the nurses and the anesthesiologists and the surgeon, surgical assist, and the opponent was going to be the tumor or the bleeding or the infection. It was like so crystal clear in my head. And that's why I wrote it down. And it was the paper towel that you had to roll out. And I was searching for a pen, pulled out a pen, and I still have that piece of paper towel.
Wow.
Yeah, it was everything, my whole trajectory. I knew what I wanted to do.
Nadine, have you ever thought about what you might have done had you not gone there?
You know what? I have thought of it a lot, partly because I share this story a lot with kids, with youth, with undergrad students. One is, I wonder sometimes, like, what if Dr. Edwards wasn't a surgeon? What if he was a dermatologist that said, yeah, I'll have a student shadow me? Would I be a dermatologist today? What if Dr. Edwards was a pediatrician? Would I be a pediatrician today? What if I wonder if I just ready to see this part of the healthcare system and ready to be influenced. I wonder if I would have said no. I wonder if I would have wallowed in self-pity for being a senior on the team when a lot of the people on the team would put on an SFU uniform again and have another try the next year. And there were the seniors on the team that when we left that locker room, we would never wear an SFU uniform again for a basketball game. Maybe wallow in self-pity, maybe say that it would be crazy going to another country, to a place I don't know, for a thing that I don't understand. What if I would have done what the rest of my team did? Say thanks, but no thanks.
Serendipity.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I took that leap of faith, and not only did it hand me the answers that I didn't even know I was looking for, but mentors that I still keep in touch with, and stories that I can really pass on to youth. And I think the big lesson that I got was opportunities don't come. It was come wrapped with a bow. You don't often get things like, dear Martha, love opportunity, or dear Indira, love, here's the answers. Like they come in obscure places. So be ready for them. And sometimes when you think you're going down to have a good summer away from the hectic media questions of why did you lose, you end up coming back with a career path that you end up loving.
Wow, what a story. It struck me listening to you. That's why it's called a calling, right? You received a calling, and not everybody has a calling. And I think that's what distinguishes those who find their passion, is when they are called, quite, surprisingly, to take on, to follow a profession. So just a remarkable story. I'd like to now take you back a little to your childhood a little bit, because I think there's some equally interesting nuggets there. You grew up in Kamloops, British Columbia, with an Ojibwe mother and an Italian immigrant father. What a unique combination. You often refer to how important your family has been on your own life journey. Most interesting, you have witnessed firsthand how residential schools continue to affect the generations that have followed, not just through your medical profession, but also because your mother graduated from a residential high school, and the first from her reserve to do so. So if I understand it correctly, your mother was also the first residential graduate to pursue post-secondary education, becoming a teacher. And a great deal has been written about transgenerational effects of survivors of traumatic life experiences. That is, the impact of those experiences, such as the Holocaust, that are now believed to be passed on to the next generation. So, to talk about it from a first hand is always very powerful. So can you talk a little bit about how the residential experiences of your mother may or may not have affected your own sense of self and personal life experiences? And do you believe that your mother's experiences have played a role in defining how you lead as a woman?
Those are great questions. Well, first of all, my mother's experiences absolutely had a great impact on me. And I think part of it is we as individuals are really a composition of our stories. That's who we are. And so that's who my mom was. And who my mom was then impacted how it was to be her daughter and to witness the resilience, the love, the patience. My mom is one of the most positive people I have ever met in my life, perhaps rivaled by my dad, who came over after the war. She is also incredibly forgiving, like a talent, a skill, a will, an ability that is striking. I think my mom really tried to shelter me and my brothers from the stories of residential school and focus really on the good. It gave her an education. It enabled her to eventually head off and become a teacher. And with time, perseverance and questioning, I've started to understand that there's another side to my mom's story. And she's started to open up and share more with me and talking to her siblings and talking to her community members and the Sagamok Anishinaabe First Nation, and going to her residential school reunion. A residential school reunion, people were so shocked when I was going with my mom and my dad and my daughter to my mom's Indian residential school reunion. And it was fascinating because for the most part, it's a school full of kids who are kids that played jokes, had pranks, had friends, had trusted their peers, had challenges. And so there's all of that. But at the same time, first thing I remember was walking in and someone who was a few years younger than my mom, when we walked into the building, came up and gave her a hug and referred to my mom by her number. Couldn't remember my mom's name, but remembered her number. And so what I've noticed in terms of the intergenerational trauma is in many ways, I'm just shocked at how I am so sensitive and so cognizant of racism, of negative stereotypes, of the biases, of the lack of cultural safety. And I've focused so much on addressing that. And my mom, having been a survivor of these direct instances in terms of residential school, has focused so much on the good and on forgiving. And so how do I balance that while sort of kind of lifting up the rock and seeing the dark side, and with my mom's support, understanding it more and understanding why I feel the way that I do and why I do what I do and why I do it with such passion, and having my parents' support in doing so. And recognizing that everyone deals with things differently. And it's really important to make sure that we give the space for people to deal with things differently and respect their approaches and their perspectives. And mine has really been to dig down deep and do what I can in the spheres of influence that I have to make a difference. And I think that's really important because that's what my daughter deserves.
It's a poignant story, one that's hard to hear and listen to, but also one that we need to hear and we need to learn from. And I have recently kind of immersed myself in some of this question around transgenerational trauma. There's a book called The Red Stairs that's been written by Marcia Letterman. I don't know if you know. She's a Vancouver writer, and she's a generational. Her parents survived the Holocaust, so she talks about it from that perspective. But as I listen to you, Nadine, you have a daughter. So how does this continue? I mean, can you reflect on that at all?
Yeah. Well, first of all, one thing that was really important to me was my mom, being a survivor of the residential school system, spent the majority of her childhood off the reserve, away from her family, away from her culture, not allowed to speak her language in a residential school. I wanted to make sure that my daughter spent the majority of her time with me to almost see if through the generations we could balance that out. And I started my career very crystal clear. If you wanted me to go to a conference, to speak, to be on a committee, to be on a board, that meant that my daughter was going to be coming to your board meetings or coming to the committee meetings or coming to the conference. And I was actually pleasantly surprised that starting out that way and sort of holding true to it, that her Ali and I were like sidekicks. Like she came everywhere with me. So that was one thing that was really, really important. The other thing is she came to these talks and she came to these meetings. And so she learned through my words and my perspectives what I thought about it, what should be done, what was non-negotiable, what was not to be tolerated. And I think she grew up kind of with that kind of mentality. And she has this intense sense of justice that I'm so proud of. But it was hard in the beginning. And I remember sharing a story where one time she was really excited to get ready for kindergarten, and it was in the summer before she started kindergarten. And just before school was out the previous year, I had taken her just, to show her the elementary school that she was going to be going to. And, she loved the playground and the school looked so exciting. And then I'm driving one day to her daycare in the summer, and she hasn't started school yet. And I'm driving along and I look in my rearview mirror and she's in the booster seat and she's crying. And she's just crying quietly. I didn't hear her. I just happened to glance. And so I'm wondering what's wrong. And I pull over and I hop in the back seat and I'm like, Halia, like what's going on? We were just driving by in a development that had started, but was really early on. So they had cleared all the trees. It was dirt. It was kind of muddy because it had rained recently. There's only one house that had started and the rest of it was just cleared land. And the house that was up wasn't finished. There was boards on one of the windows. There was no siding. It looked dilapidated and it did not look welcoming. And she asked, is that where I'm going to school? And I said, no, Alia, remember I showed you where you're going to school. You're going to school with a really great playground. And she said, no, like, am I going to school there? I said, no, this is not a school. This is not where you're going. And then she asked me, like, if, when you drop me off at school, are you going to be allowed to pick me up? Am I going to be allowed to come home? And all of a sudden, I realized that through her eyes, she was hearing about a horrific experience. And I never talked about my elementary school years where I went to a public school, and she was hearing me share about my mom's experiences and my mom's school that she went to and the impact and the legacy of residential schools and Canada's history there. She had sat in these meetings and it was fascinating. Even she was going to a French immersion school and how she was going to go there and she was going to be immersed in French, and it was going to be highly encouraged that the kids don't use English language while they're there. And I thought, how could I have been so blindsided that I was looking at it as this is great. She's going to, she's going to go to French immersion. She's going to learn French. She's going to be fluent in both of our languages in terms of the Canadian perspective. And I thought this was amazing. And then all of a sudden, from her perspective, sitting in those meetings, she was going to a school where she wouldn't be allowed to speak her language. And it was such an eye-opener to me to realize that how do you navigate the history of our country with someone who it's her grandma, it's her aunt or great aunt, it's her great grandma, it's her great great grandma. And how do you navigate that? Well, one thing I've chosen is to not hide it, to tackle it, to talk about it. And that's what we've done together, is learned about it together. And I think that's such a huge part of it too. I think that's what Canada needs to do. That's what universities need to do. That's what corporations need to do. That's what governments need to do. They need to realize that the history needs to be taken into consideration if we're going to move forward as a nation that's different.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that intimate story. It's extremely powerful, and I think it makes us all think seriously about our own personal roles, but the roles that people like you and your mother and now your daughter are being not burdened with, but are responsible to actually handle. It's really quite informative. Nadine, I remember your daughter. I went to a conference, I think it was at the Waska Center, and your daughter was there. And you know what I thought? I thought to myself, how well behaved she was. I thought, I can't imagine bringing my daughters when they were that age and having them sit there and color and she was She was so sweet, and I was fascinated with that. She might have been like, I don't know, 6 years old or something. And I thought, how amazing that she was able to entertain herself. That's yeah.
She, I love sharing those stories with her, what she remembers, and then when she was so young that she doesn't even remember.
Well, be sure and share with her she made an impression on me. I'd hire her today. So look, in addition to family, we all tend to be affected by other people. Okay.
Yes.
That we all get help from our friends and colleagues, and it really does take a village. I've been interested in my own life to look back and think about the people who've really affected my decisions, affected some of my own values and my principles. And, it's kind of interesting. Some of these people are people and some of these people are people that you just learn about and read about. But are there people who you knew or just admired who have inspired you or led by example that you now recognize as being instrumental in your leadership experience? And how important is it, do you think, for all of us to have examples of extraordinary people who demonstrate through their actions what great leadership is?
Yeah, another great question. I think in my case, taking a village is like an understatement. It maybe a metropolis. I needed more than a village, as my friends and family would be very clear about. But it goes back to, the names of your elementary school teachers that you can remember, high school teachers, coaches. Coaches were instrumental. And I had two specific coaches in high school, and a counselor and then my basketball coach at SFU, Allison McNeil. They were important, I think, in my early years in terms of what they demanded from me, but more importantly, how they cultivated my ability to demand it of myself. And this wasn't skill with respect to like a coach. It wasn't skill. It was the commitment and the tenacity and the determination to get the skill. The skill is kind of like the side benefit. And so I would say coaches, but then moving on to my career, it was a Tom Edwards who took me under his wing in a hospital that had never had students before following him around or anyone around. They didn't have nursing programs or medical school or anything in the entire city. So this was brand new, and for him to branch out and to take me on. But then as my career started to kind of expand, there's a list of surgeons that provided guidance for me. There's a list of researchers that I worked with and that worked with me and supported me. In the world of Indigenous leadership, there weren't a lot. But boy, like the people that were there, Richard Jock from the FNHA, Joe Gallagher from the FNHA, Jeff Redding from multiple different areas. So many people in the area of public health, down at Hopkins and then at UBC ultimately. So many. I think what's important when, when I look at this is it was really never enough for me to have people out there that I didn't know. I really kind of needed to get to know them. And I think actually it was a basketball coach. This one time I had there was this player, Cheryl Miller. She was phenomenal. She was like the best female basketball player in the US, which, hate to admit it, but I think then translate to probably the best in the world. And so we were going to this tournament to watch, and she was going to be there. And at the end of the game, we were standing right where she was going to walk by, and I wanted to get her autograph. And my coach said, "Sit down." I was like, "I want to get her autograph." And he's like, "You don't want to get her autograph." I was like, "Well, she's amazing. She's amazing. I want to be like her." And he's like, "You don't want to be like her. You want to be better." And it was just like he was just so appalled that I would want to get someone's autograph of someone that I was ultimately aiming to be a better basketball player, a better passer, a better shooter, a better defensive player. And so what I've tended to do over my career is when there's people that I look up to, I tend to reach out and see what's behind the surface. Because if it's anything like me, sometimes I look calm, cool, collected, and I'm not. Sometimes you see the surface of what I think, but you don't see everything. Sometimes you see the surface of what I'm feeling, but you don't really have a clue. And so I'm like, maybe other people are like that too. So yeah, there's people that catch my eye, catch my attention, and I think, wow, they're pretty amazing. But I really want to get to know them if they're going to start to influence how I do things and how I approach things.
I just wanted to recount something, a memory that came to me, Nadine, that I think you'd be interested. When I was at U of A, we had a dean of education who was passionate with ensuring that, given, Alberta's lots of rural areas and lots of First Nations residential schools. They've had their history too, but she wanted to ensure that First Nations kids were taught by First Nations teachers rather than sending, a teacher from the system. And so she started this program where women in the community who wanted to do teaching, who were married and had obligations, couldn't leave their communities, could get an education. So U of A actually provided a program by which they could become teachers in those communities. And I remember going up to a former residential school. You're right, it leaves an impact, which had now become a school in the neighborhood. I think it was in St. Paul's. The name was St. Paul's. I think it was Northern Alberta. And meeting with these teachers who were U of A trained, who did not have to
Yeah.
leave their communities to become teachers. So you realize those are the kinds of things that people have to continue to do, I think, to bridge exactly what you said, having to leave your home and your community, or to be taught by people who don't understand your culture or the trauma that your ancestors have experienced. So I thought I'd share that with you because I was looking back, always very struck by that story. Which brings me to racism. You've been laser focused on it and battling for health justice. And it's been reported that you acquired the nerve to take this issue on after becoming appalled to hear racist views about Indigenous health from a project advisor. You've been quoted as saying, and I quote, I remember this one time, it was many years ago, a surgeon came in and he had just finished a long case. And he sat down and was like, phew, if I never operate on another Indian, it'll be too soon. Oh my God. Hearing that quote makes me, my blood curdle, if you will. I can't even begin to imagine how you must have felt hearing this blatant racist comment from a colleague. And my question is not how this experience affected your determination to confront racism, but rather how should we respond as women leaders to comments such as these at the time that they're spoken? Did you confront the offender? Did you say something to refute his racism, or did you just let it pass and file it in your memory bank? I've always struggled with having the nerve to speak truth to power, and I'm curious what advice, if any, would you give women colleagues when they're exposed to blatant discriminatory comments, crude jokes, or unacceptable rhetoric?
Yeah, I certainly remember that experience. I was actually in one of my final years of training, if not my final year from what I remember. And, when you're in your training, you're in all these hospitals, all over the place, 3 months here, 2 months here, 6 months here. And it was, I was in the surgical lounge where the nurses and the surgeons kind of sit in between operations while the rooms are being turned over. And I was sitting at a table with a few other surgeons, and they were my faculty members. And this surgeon came and sat down, and it did look like he'd had probably a hard operation that he had just done. He was kind of sweaty, and now I know what it's like. You could be pretty tired, pretty hungry, and he sat down and he made those remarks, and yeah, it was uncomfortable. It was awkward. The faculty that I was with knew my background. None of them said anything. It became quite quiet. And, my mom always taught me, before saying anything, if you feel that way, count to 10. Don't fly off the cuff. But it was a situation that I need to figure out something. And so I did my count to 10 and no one said anything. It was just dead quiet at the table. So I thought, well, all right. So I started packing up my stuff because I was eating lunch, I put it all on my tray, my drink, the food, fork, utensils. And I just said, well, if you don't want to operate on another Indian and get paid for it, then you probably don't want to have lunch with one and not get paid. And I just walked away and I went and sat at a different table. Over a span of the next few minutes, a couple of the faculty came and sat with me. A couple of the faculty got up and left. And because I looked over at the table a few minutes later, and that surgeon that said that was sitting by himself. And then time passed. No one said anything to me. But, it was time to start the next case. Next operation went on and life continued. It was actually years later that same individual asked if I had time to talk. And by this time, I was a surgeon. I was out on my own. And I thought, oh, okay, this surgeon's going to maybe have a patient that they want to refer to me. They have a clinical question. They're asking for some, me to do a consult. And sure, I have time to talk. And he asked if I remembered, just like no context or anything. He said, do you remember? And I said, do I remember? And he said, that comment that I made, those years ago. And I said, I remember. And he said, I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. And I said, what are you sorry for? Are you sorry for hurting my feelings? Are you sorry that you made it awkward? Like, what are you sorry for? And he said, well, that's just it. If I would have said sorry back then, it would have been insincere. And I know that you never would have accepted it. You would have seen right through it. But ever since then, I want you to know that I've caught myself and my reaction when I see an Indigenous patient. I've caught myself in some of my biases, the negative stereotypes that come to mind. I've caught myself and realized just how wrong I was. And I think of it. I think of that every single time. And I want you to know that I'm sorry. And it was so sincere. It was obviously a lot of thought, a lot of emotion, a lot of consideration. And I think most importantly, a change. You can't change your perspectives or that sort of stuff overnight, but a change. Maybe the people the Indigenous patients that have crossed his path since then are just treated with more respect, more humility, more humanity, more compassion, more empathy, because he had that experience. And had I not said anything, maybe he would have just let it go. And so how should we? I think every situation is different. I know that when I'm with students, I don't put them in a situation where they're exposed to conflict like that. I will address it later. I'm more likely to address it if it's something that's just between myself and another colleague or someone in the community or someone in a leadership position. And I think that there's something to be said about speaking up, having the nerve.
Nadine, I think you're very wise in how you've interpreted this whole incident, and there probably have been others. And while it's very important, I think, to, as you say, cultivate the nerve to confront wrongs and injustices, but I also think there's a responsibility, as I listen to your story, for the people around you to have taken that gauntlet and run with it as well.
Mhm.
In other words, we all have a responsibility. It doesn't have to be a slander to us personally. It can be, something going on to a gay person, even though
Yeah.
we're not gay, okay? And we must, as a community, be prepared to confront it at every level, whether it affects us personally or not.
Mhm.
And so I would have hoped that your colleagues, would
Yeah.
in the future be able to stand up and speak truth to power, not just on your behalf, but just because it's the right thing to do. Maybe to switch gears a little bit. You've been first in so many areas. We just heard today, as Indira related, you were the first woman surgeon, I think you said, to be promoted to full professor at UBC. I mean, that's hard to believe, but you've been the first female Indigenous surgeon, the first First Nation student to graduate from UBC's medical school. the first kind of co-founder of UBC's Center of Excellence in Indigenous Health, the leader of the Northern Biobank. It goes on, right? You've been a first. And, we've been looking at being first, and we're wondering whether you think you had different pressures and expectations placed on you because you were the first to assume these various roles. And perhaps more important, do you think you're being first on two variables? As you were sharing with us, it was so many people dwell on the indigeneity part of your personality and your background, but also on gender. Do you think being first on two variables makes your role has made your role as a leader more challenging than if you were a white male? I always tell the story when I was appointed at UBC president. Before I actually took office, I got a call from a colleague across the country, and she says, "Oh, congratulations. We're thrilled that a woman now is the first president of the University of British Columbia." And then she said, "But don't mess up.
Mm-hmm.
Don't mess up."
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of that's a strange way to congratulate somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you've had that experience of the spotlight being on you and so much being made of your being first. Has that been a good thing? Has it been a challenge? And what would you tell others who have to go first?
That's a great question. First of all, there's a lot of first left to be undertaken when it comes to women and Indigenous peoples in Canada. And so I think society and Canada as a whole needs to start to separate the success of the individual versus what that means for society. So I think we have to stop patting ourselves on the back as society for someone being first in something, particularly when it's filling a massive chasm created by historical policies and the legacies of historical actions. So, and they're not really historical, but some of them are just taking different forms, like the Indian residential school system. But so I think part of it is really recognizing that we need to really start calling out and not remembering to celebrate the individual, but not letting institutions get away with what they've done. I went into, at the beginning of this podcast, we talked about why I went into surgery. I didn't go into surgery to be the first Indigenous female surgeon. I didn't go into medicine to be the first female First Nations. I went into it because I thought this was the most amazing career ever. And I just wanted to do it. And so there's 120 people in my medical school class. We all took the same exams. We all had the same rotations. We all had to do the same things to make it through those 4 years. And then we graduated together and we all walked across the same stage, got our degrees. There's nothing different about what I did compared to 119 colleagues. So why celebrate me differently rather than really kind of take a look and go, seriously, the first? And I think part of it is, do you feel more pressure? I think one thing is you could look at it, twist it around. And so I try to look at it, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity. This is an opportunity rather than this is an obligation. This is pressure. But I think one of the first times I really realized it, I let my guard down and I found, and I wasn't expecting it. And I found out, and I think you said it in the beginning of the show, that when I graduated from medicine, for my internal medicine friends, they'll laugh at this, but, as someone who was going into surgery being given the internal medicine prize, it was interesting. Someone going into surgery and being the top graduating student was interesting. But when I found out about those kind of things, the first emotion and really the main emotion I remember is relief. Relief that I would not be interpreted as getting into medicine or surgery or wherever I ended up going because of these kind of policies where we were starting to kind of go, okay, because I was fighting for medical school admissions when I was in medical school, and we had succeeded to a small degree by the time I even graduated from medical school in terms of admissions policies at UBC for Indigenous students. And then all of a sudden just realizing that I had some credibility that was objective that I wouldn't be put into a little corner saying, well, yeah, she made it because she's female. She made it because she's Indigenous. She got it. And that was a surprise to me that I would take any type of honor like that and interpret it as relief rather than just celebrate it and be happy and be honored. So that's something. But you know what, there's a lot of, I say, my daughter gets frustrated sometimes because she says, Mom, you've never had to really apply for much. Because she's applying for jobs. And I just kind of, you create the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health with, Martin Schechter was the person who co-founded it with me. And so then you become the co-director. I didn't have to apply for it because you just create it. And that's, Martha, you were part of the funding that the Center for Excellence got. I was talking to someone recently and I said, if the center was founded under President Tube, but after that you were at UBC for a very short period of time as the interim. And I thought, and I've said, like, Martha Piper did more I think you were there for 10 months, and you did more for the center in 10 months than UBC since the start of the center. So part of it is a lot of the first that I've done, I've just sort of seen gaps. There's no biobank in the north. Therefore, there's no ability for indigenous, rural, remote, northern people in Canada, but this is based in British Columbia, to participate in research in this area. Well, then why don't we create a biobank? So I work on creating a biobank, and then I get to be the director of it. So I'm the first director of the center, but that's because I created the darn thing. And so, and so my daughter, like, she was applying for a summer job. She's like, Mom, I don't know if you really understand this. And she was like, because I'm not going to create like a restaurant, and I'm not going to create. So, you didn't have to apply for these jobs. So, it's an honor. It's an honor. It's a responsibility. There's a sense of obligation, but I'm doing what I love. I'm passionate about it, and I want to see change. And I think for me, my personality is, it would be harder to sit back and wait for someone to change than to step out, have the nerve to go out there and actually hopefully have a small incremental role in that change.
Well, Nadine, it's been just wonderful to listen to your stories and your ability to interpret them with such wisdom. I think it's been really very moving, certainly for me. And so we'd like to thank you for sharing with us your stories and experiences as a leader. No question, you've been an inspirational trailblazer, and I suspect a mentor and a model for generations of young women to follow. And yet so often we hear that young women listening to the stories of trailblazers like yourself cannot see themselves in leadership roles. And they think there's no way they can achieve or even aspire to achieve what you've accomplished. For some reason, they believe that you have superpowers permitting you to do things that they cannot possibly accomplish. And while they may be right about your superpowers, I'd like to ask you, how do you ensure that others will follow you and become leaders? So what do you tell young women about how they should be their best selves and aspire to make a difference in the world? And how do you ensure that others follow in your footsteps?
This is one of my favorite things, is to work with youth in particular, right down from elementary school, high school, and undergrad. I think, first of all, to share with them that I didn't know. A big kind of fear that particularly high school students and undergrad students have is, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know where I'm going to go. I don't know what my next step is. And for them to know that, hey, you know what? Neither did I. I can honestly say that if you would have told me when I was in undergrad that I was going to have a research career, I would have thought that was the funniest thing you could ever say. And like there was no way that was ever going to happen. If you told me that I would in any way even know what a biobank was, I would think that somehow you got the wrong Nadine. If, until that encounter in Tennessee, if you would have told me I was going to be a surgeon, it had never, ever, like even was nowhere on my radar at all. If you would have told me I was going to do a master's in public health, I would have said, what is a master's in public health? Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. There was no MPH at UBC at the time, even. There certainly was none at SFU. And I can tell you one thing, there is no one in my life that had an MPH that was saying you should do your MPH. And so when I look at sort of what makes up my career now, I had no clue. And the other thing is that I think the biggest thing that is a marker of a predictor of success is if you're just staying true to yourself. So if someone wants to do research with me, I just say, alrighty, well, what are you interested in? Because we need to find a research question for you that you want the answer to, not me. My research questions may not resonate with you. And if that doesn't, so it needs to resonate with you, or it's going to be boring, or it's going to be hard, or it's going to be frustrating. If you want to pick a program, pick a job, it has to be something that you want to do. I think if it's whatever your goal is, as long as it's something that you want, I think that you can find it within yourself to get the results that you're looking for. And I feel so strongly about that I can really look in the eyes of whether it's a kindergarten kid that I'm talking to the class, or someone in grade 7, or a grade 11 student that's wondering about what science classes to take, or the undergrad students that I get to work with so frequently. I think just a belief in yourself. And I think I'm a good example of it. I don't think I'm special. There's really nothing special about me. I think the reason why I have the honor of being on your podcast is because of the failure of society more than what I do. But I do know that to an odd degree that really at times annoyed my friends is there was no one that enjoyed undergrad more than me. There was no one that enjoyed medical school more than me. Like, I loved medical school. Like, I was sad when it was over. When surgery residency was over, it was traumatic to lose that ability to be, your whole role was to learn. When my fellowship was over, it was just so sad and devastating to have to leave that environment of colleagues and friends. So it's finding something that you love is just keep looking until you find it. And then even your search for success is going to be enjoyable.
Nadine, we've interviewed a variety of women who've led in all sorts of different ways. And what you have shared with us today really underlines what so many of these women have experienced. And that is to think that you can plan your career and sit down as a 6-year-old, let alone a 20-year-old, and say, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to get married, and then I'm going to have a baby, and then I'm going to work, and then I'm going to be, the best lawyer, or going to be on the Supreme Court, or I'm going to be prime minister. I mean, it's foolish. And yet I always say, your Uncle Joe always asks you, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What do you want to be? They ask this question when you're 12.
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous question. And whatever you say you want to be at 12 has nothing to do with what you'll end up being. Yeah. Did any of us, as you said, did you ever think you'd be a researcher? Did you ever think you'd do a master's degree in public health? Indira and I would tell you exactly the same. Yeah. Did we ever think we would end up doing what we did? Absolutely not. Did I sit down at the age of 5 and say, I want to be a university president? I mean, come on.
Yeah, yeah.
And it goes back to your assessment on opportunity and passion. And when opportunities, as you say, it doesn't blare at you. This is it. This is it. This is it. This is your opportunity. But when opportunity connects with passion, that's the magic combination. And it will occur. I tell my grandchildren, be patient. It'll occur. You'll figure it out. Look, we are so pleased that you've been able to join us today. And we have one last comment, which is we would be remiss if we did not congratulate you on your most recent induction into the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame. My goodness. What an amazing tribute to you and to the role you have played in reshaping the landscape of medicine and public health in Canada. I mean, seriously, you have made a difference. and continue to make a difference. And we all like to take pride in you because you're part of our UBC community. We all say, oh, yeah, we know Nadine, but we do take enormous pride in this honor and know how well deserved this recognition is. So warmest and most sincere congratulations. And thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those kind words. With respect to the Medical Hall of Fame, that's a metropolis that I'm taking in with me to that Hall of Fame, without a doubt. And thank you so much for the honor of being on your show. I really enjoyed reading your book. I have a long list of friends and colleagues that I am going to be sending copies to. I'm really looking forward to hearing the other podcasts and learning from the questions you ask and the answers that you're getting.
We will watch you with great admiration, Nadine. So thank you again for being part of this.
All the best.
That was a remarkable interview. I mean, there was so much that she touched on. She's obviously reflected deeply, I think, about her roots and her mother being in residential schools and the fact that her mother took such a positive, or put forward a very positive view of it, and how she then learned more about it and made it her life's mission to really try and understand and, if you will, highlight and recognize the cost, I think, that came with that whole system. But I think what impressed me in the end was that she has been really just remarkable in seeking opportunity. When she saw a need, right? She created the opportunities, whether it was the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health or the Biobank. And it wasn't about being the first or anything like that. It was about find the opportunity. If you have the passion, pursue it, and then look for gaps and do what you can to make a difference. So that's what I took away from her remarks.
Absolutely. I mean, her experiences and how she got to where she is, particularly her movement from being an athlete and saying the surgical operating room became the basketball court. I thought that metaphor was beautiful. And the other thing I was struck by, with all of her accomplishments and all of her being the first, she continued to talk about everyone else who had contributed to everything she was doing. And I loved her saying she didn't need a village. She needed a metropolis.
Yeah.
She hundreds of people who have made a difference in her life. And that is remarkable, to be able to be so generous and recognize that even small contributions make a difference. Anyway, it was truly a pleasure and a privilege.
So in closing, we want to thank you again for listening to this episode of She's Got Nerve. If you enjoyed tuning in, then please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and share this conversation with your friends.
Go to www.nerve2021.com or follow our social media channels at Nervebook 2021. Find out more about women in leadership and to access some useful resources.
And if there are any specific topics you would like us to cover in the future, then please email nervebook2021@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
A very special thanks to our team, marketing manager and producer Orla Mackerline, and show manager Eilish Courtney.